This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
She's used to taking questions, but this time under a different oath. Pauline Hanson was grilled about a tweet she posted on the day of the Queen's death in 2022 in response to Deputy Greens leader Mehreen Faruqi, who said she couldn't mourn the leader of a racist empire. Senator Hanson's advice: pack your bags and piss off back to Pakistan. Senator Faruqi says that was a breach of racial discrimination law. The court heard Senator Hanson has used the phrase before.
If you're not happy here, then go back where you want to go.
In other videos played to the judge, she said she wouldn't sell her house to a Muslim person.
Because I don't believe that they're compatible with our way of life.
Made this comment about Islam.
Islam is a disease. We need to vaccinate ourselves against that.
And 2 weeks ago,
We have Muslims in this country marrying, getting on our welfare system, breeding, and we are paying for this.
One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, has told a Sydney court that she didn't know that a fellow senator was Muslim when she told her to piss off back to Pakistan on social media. Greens Deputy Leader Mehreen Faruqi has taken Senator Hanson to the federal court over a tweet posted on the day Queen Elizabeth II died in September 22. Fuck, I mean...
Just yesterday, doesn't it?
Just yesterday. It's real, man. Shout out to a real one, and we miss you every day, Queen. Senator Faruqi had called for a treaty with First Nations people, I assume that's supposed to say, and said she couldn't mourn the leader of a racist empire built on stolen lives, land, and wealth of colonised people, which is the correct take. Senator Hanson responded with a post that said, in part, that it was clear that Senator Faruqi was not happy and should pack your bags and piss off back to Pakistan. She's a fucking Australian citizen and senator, by the way, Pauline. But anyway, the Deputy Greens leader claims that that constituted racial discrimination, but Senator Hanson's lawyers say Faruqi's tweet was intended to provoke a response. So this, we talked about this on the show a while ago, but now the court case is actually happening. Pauline Hanson is being brought before the woke criminal justice system, being forced to answer for her posting crimes.
Her crimes of truth. Her crimes of truth.
Senator Hanson was today cross-examined by Senator Faruqi's counsel, Saul Holt KC, who accused her of lying under oath by denying that she knew Senator Faruqi was Muslim at the time of the tweet. I've never gone and asked. I don't ask anyone their religion, Senator Hanson said. Senator Hanson said she wasn't aware that 97% of the Pakistani population are Muslim.
Okay. So this is where I have to out myself, right? And maybe this is going to be my last episode of Serious Danger, because I don't really get this, because I didn't know 97% of the Pakistani population were Muslim. Is that something that everyone's meant to know? Like, I feel like it's reasonable.
But it's a Muslim majority country.
Sure,
and it's a pretty reasonable assumption that chances are, maybe it would be the exception if this person from Pakistan wasn't Muslim. Not saying that all Pakistanis are Muslim, of course.
Well, but that's what I mean. I think I'm like, in my head, I would have been like, I would think it's wrong to assume that if you're from Pakistan, you're Muslim. I now know if it's 97%, then I think no, it's probably right to assume they are. But I didn't know that. I wouldn't be surprised if the average like whitey Australian like me didn't know that.
Well, it's all just foreign, isn't it? All from different places and that.
Right. But it's
maybe one thing to like not assume, that it's another thing for Hanson, which seems to be like, hey, it's crazy to me that she's Muslim. What the hell?
Well,
that's
in
nuts.
this particular instance, like I'm like, okay, sure. I guess it being Mehreen, who she's a public figure. She work in the same place. You both work in the Senate. It's fairly reasonable to assume that you knew she was Muslim. But
maybe.
I was surprised to learn that 97% of Pakistanis were Muslim. So hey, living and learning.
Wow. Truth for Pauline. Justice for Pauline. I guess the lawyer's trying to get her on this idea that she lied on oath, that she had no idea that Mehreen Faruqi was Muslim.
But
so you've lied on oath in your claim that you did not know that Senator Faruqi was a Muslim, Senator Hanson, haven't you? When I put that tweet out, I didn't know, she insisted.
Okay, well, that's why I'm like, is the claim that she's being racist or that she's being Islamophobic? Like, is she discriminating on the basis of race or religion?
Well, it'd be interesting under the Racial Discrimination Act, because this has been a long, ongoing debate, particularly that I've come across in the War on Terror era, right? People saying, hey, I'm not criticizing people's race, I'm just criticizing their religion. And he's sort of
that's also Like, if you're discriminating against someone on the basis of their religion, that's still discrimination. It's just a different.
Well, yes, people would say I'm criticizing the religion. I'm criticizing
yeah.
this set of ideas, you know, which is probably a position I used to have again in my annoying atheist phase. I'm like, I don't even see color, man. I just fake from worrying about these ideas and go, well, but yes, this religion is overwhelmingly followed by people of color. You can't just ignore that and pretend that isn't a factor.
Sure.
And certainly racists or certainly ignorant people like Pauline Hanson will throw Muslim and the race is all together and mixed up. Again, I would have thought that Pauline Hanson would assume that that almost any person of color she comes across is a Muslim. So it's weird for her to be like, Senator Mehreen Faruqi, Muslim? What? I
mean, I think one thing is clear. When she tweets, pack your bags and piss off back to Pakistan, she knew that she's Pakistani. So I think there's some discrimination going on. There's some vilification going on here, whether she knew she was Muslim or not. But sure, I think she probably is lying, but who knows?
Senator Hanson denied that she believed that Senator Faruqi, as a Muslim, should never have been allowed to migrate to Australia because she's not an extremist and had obtained Australian citizenship. I think in the court case, they're trying to pull out this idea like this is what you've always thought. You know, this wasn't some sudden emotional response to this Queen tweet. You hate people of colour and you hate Senator Mehreen Faruqi particularly, and you don't think she should be here. And in fact, you've said on multiple occasions that you wouldn't sell your house to a Muslim Australian because you don't think they belong here. You think that Islam is a disease that we need to vaccinate ourselves against. She loves vaccinations when it comes to Islam, but
funny, I thought we didn't support those. Right, so they want to be able to point to her Islamophobia as a precursor to this incident. I understand.
Pattern of behaviour, I guess, yeah. Quite apart from the tweet that she put out on the day that the Queen passed, you already wanted her to piss off back to Pakistan, Mr. Holt, Mehreen Faruqi's lawyer said. Senator Hanson replied, disagree.
No, not. Senator Hanson repeatedly interrupted with, nah.
I think she went on to say, I know you are, you said you are, but what am I?
What am I?
Later, Senator Hanson was asked whether she had ever suggested a migrant from a white background should leave Australia. I probably have, she replied.
Who among us? Hey? Who among us has not?
The senator said she was distraught and very upset on the day of the Queen's death, as we all were. She said Senator Faruqi's tweet, brought to her attention by a staff member, was insulting. Oh, triggered.
It was offensive. Were you offended?
Yeah. Facts don't care about your feelings, Pauline, so... I also love this defense from Pauline's lawyer. Mr. Smark, that's her lawyer's name, said in Senator Hanson's engine of anger, colour was the last thing on her mind. All right, colour is never the last thing on Pauline Hanson's mind, and you need to read a book or watch one news report to be across that. Mr. Smark said the judge could conclude that she is not shy about complaining about Islam, particularly extremist Islam, when she feels it is warranted. If Your Honour forms the view that she's not a shrinking violet on that topic, that is, if she's got something to say about Islam, she'll say it, then its absence from the tweet is notable.
Right. So we should be grateful that she didn't hurl Islamophobic slurs at Mehreen Faruqi in that tweet. That was actually really restrained of her. And she should get credit for that.
Look, this lady's saying some unhinged Islamophobic shit all the time. But in this particular tweet, she barely mentions Islam at all. So credit? Actually pretty cool.
I rest my case.
In her evidence, Senator Hanson clarified that she didn't actually mean that she wanted Senator Faruqi to go back to Pakistan, Mr. Smart said. That was obviously rhetorical.
Oh.
Which is like, well, hang on. First of all, Pauline Hanson's a straight shooter. She says what she means what she says what she means. What you see is what you get. She blasts through all the woke bullshit, the PC crap out there. Also, sending Senator Faruqi back to Pakistan, I assume, is one nation policy. So now she's walking away from her own political platform. You know?
Wow. We're getting some mixed messages now. I never would have expected that from Pauline Hanson. Never would have expected her to, go back on her word and, I don't know, double cross us like this.
Make no sense. Hey, Pauline, please explain.
Yep, I don't like it. It's been confusing and I don't like it.
Disagree.
No.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
Look, goodness me, the Greens are a bit Stalinist. In other news, Andrew, the French are a bit arrogant, koalas are very cuddly and water is wet.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hello, everybody. This is Serious Danger. It's a podcast about green politics in Australia. It is not an official Greens Party podcast, and that's not rhetoric, that's just a fact.
Whoa.
This podcast is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin. Tom Ballard, how are you going?
Hello, Emerald. I'm very well, thank you. I am on the lands of the Wadjuk Noongar people. I'm in Boorloo, Perth, 2 hours behind you, performing at the incredible Perth Comedy Festival. It's too early for me.
Too early. 8:30 a.m., 8:40 a.m. at this point.
I did 2 comedy spots last night, all right? I did a 7-minute and a 5-minute. It was fucking crazy.
7-minute and 5? Wait, really?
Yeah, it was nuts.
Your life is so strange. What a strange quote-unquote job. Yes, well, look, I'm Emerald. I'm in Meanjin. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country. This week we're talking about gendered violence. It is Domestic Violence Prevention Month, and there have been big rallies, there have been national cabinet meetings. It's a real sort of moment. We're talking about the government's response or lack thereof and our thoughts on it. Also, we do have some content from the second live show in Meanjin, Brisbane with Trina Massey, the Greens councillor for the Gabba ward, that we'll put out at some point. Don't worry, it is coming. You will get a little taste of the interview that we had with her and reflections on the council election and everything like that at some point in the near future.
Loved meeting Trina. Very cool.
She's very
person.
cool.
Holy shit.
Extremely cool. Makes you feel a little uncool, hey?
Well, that's not how I felt, but if that's how you felt, that's cool.
The level of cool is kind of commensurate. I understand. Look, what some people thought was not cool was our chat with Max Chandler Mather in our previous live show. I hear some experts are not too happy with that on the internet.
Yeah, it's just all the classic housing shit and supply, demand. Max doesn't know what he's talking about. He's blind. He's left-wing populist rhetoric against the solution to the housing crisis, which is relaxing all planning regulations and letting property developers do whatever the fuck they want. If we do that, then everything will be fixed and it'll be great. I saw one comment on one of the clips we posted. They just wrote, "Imagine walking into a comedy club and you get this," which is like, okay, it wasn't a comedy club, but it's not like people going
people
along.
Were really disappointed. Yeah.
This guy just did 50 minutes of housing policy chat. This fucking sucks.
I mean, it has been reported to me that there was at least one Labor member there.
Whoa.
I heard this, from a friend who recognised someone there that was a Labor member, and they apparently had agreed to go along with their friend. And they're like, yeah, like they're a Labor member and everything, but they were like, oh, I enjoy the show. And it still boggles, but they're out there. They're listening right now. And I guess it's just our charm and wit that gets them through us shitting on their party constantly. I don't know. More power to you, I say. You should also become a patron.
We can't afford to turn away any listeners. If you're a member of if you're Pauline Hanson, you're welcome here in the Serious Danger family. It's fine.
And look, if you can afford to pay Labor Party membership fees and, when there's such a waste of money, you should also afford to become a patron and give us $3 a month. People who have done that recently, we want to thank Kate, Bridie, Checker McCarthy, Helen, Liam, Neil. Also, special shout out to people who have opted in to throw us a bit more than $3 a month. Some people are given $10, $15, folks. You definitely don't have to do that. $3 a month is, very lovely and helps us pay Mike's wages and keep the show going. But those folks who've thrown in a bit extra, we really appreciate it. If you become a patron, you get access to bonus content. We just put out a really fun episode. We did an interview with writer Jeff Sparrow and the cartoonist Sam Warman about their new book, 12 Rules for Strife. It's a play on words, folks. Don't know if you've ever heard a little book called 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. When are we getting him on, by the way? Maybe
we should get him on.
Another Patreon episode. Look, this is a really cool little book. It's very cool and fun illustrations and just steps through these kind of 12 rules with this overriding theme of like organising across social divides and, building a really strong left coalition. We talked to Sam and Jeff about direct versus delegated politics and bringing people into the fold. It was a really, really fun chat. And yep, that's over on Patreon now. If you're not already signed up or if you haven't listened to it, you should go listen.
I loved it because obviously Sam and Jeff have been around the left for a very, very long time, and this book is kind of like them distilling all the stuff they've seen within leftist movements that kind of piss them off or things that they don't think is working or just the articulation of, that dichotomy between direct politics and delegated politics was very clarifying for me. And to be able to learn about that, think about all that, get inspired by that and see cool pictures is quite a good package deal. So, 12 Rules for Strife came out this week, and that's definitely worth listening to if you get a chance.
Yes.
Also, final little plug just before we move on and get into the guts of the episode. We're doing Comedy in the West again. This is something we did in 2022. Big fundraiser for the Greens of the Western Suburbs, my local branch, the Maribyrnong branch. Local elections happening this year in Victoria, and of course the federal election looms. We need cash to run cool candidates for the Greens that don't like the planet being on fire and think that everyone should be allowed to eat and live in a house. So please get involved. It's going to be a really fun night. It totally sold out last time. It's happening on Saturday, May 25th at Kindred Studios in Yarraville. Very cool venue. I'm going to be hosting. The lineup's going to be awesome. We're going to announce the full lineup very shortly. But yes, come on down. Comedy in the West on Saturday, May 25th. We'll put the link in the show notes. Tickets are on sale now. And all those funds going towards the movement. The fight for a better world.
Right. Wow. Very grand, Tom.
Also, just come, otherwise it'll be embarrassing to do comedy to a half.
That would be really embarrassing. Do it for Tom's sake.
To be clear, we did ask to speak, myself and Katie, and we're told that that wasn't possible, and that's fine. I respect the organisers' right to do that.
That's a full-out lie.
To do that. We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government.
Before we get into this section of the episode, just wanted to really quickly say up the top, we're talking about gendered violence, we're talking about domestic and family violence and assault. And if that might bring up stuff for you that might be too difficult to work with, or if something brings up things for you and you want to reach out to have a chat to someone, you can call the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1-800-737-732. So, May, the month into which we have just entered, is Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month, and it comes at what seems to be this kind of like convection point, this growing unrest around gendered violence in Australia. We were having a chat about this before this week, and I feel like this, I have to say, almost like crept up on me. Like it feels like we've really had this moment this week, maybe kind of last week, that is related to a few incidents, and perhaps you said, you know, there was the Lerman defamation case where we've got this court ruling that Bruce Lerman raped Brittany Higgins in Parliament House, knowing that she after that has been dragged through the courts and the media and, you know, had significant impacts on her life, and only to have this ruling now in a civil court that he did rape her. We've had, you know, there was a lot of outrage over the death of 23-year-old Hannah Maguire, who was found dead in a burnt-out car near Ballarat, and her former partner has been charged with murder. Of course, we had the stabbings at Bondi Junction where the perpetrator particularly targeted women and was said to have, you know, problems with women. And then you've got another one on Sunday in Perth. A 35-year-old man was charged with murdering a 30-year-old mother late the previous week. It'll be alleged the accused set the property alight while the victim was still inside, and the woman was later found dead.
Yeah, so there's all this stuff swirling around. I don't know. I could be wrong. My understanding is the Bondi Junction stabbings in particular was something that brought things to a head. I didn't know that this month had a particular label on it in regards to stopping gendered violence.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but
right, okay, that's all sort of how it's worked out. But also, and perhaps we'll get to this, I know you've got some sort of stats research that you lined up, but at least the reporting around this, the particular level of crisis or alarm is the idea that this is getting worse, or at least the stats might suggest that in this year at least, more women than normal. God, that's a terrible phrase to say, but something seems to be happening in which this kind of gendered violence is becoming more common, or this problem is getting worse. That's the impression I've got.
Well, yes, and I'm interested to talk about that because I think it might be a little misleading, but I want to get into the stats later.
Yep.
First, I think, when this really started to hit, come on my radar as a national moment was last weekend. I think it was on the Sunday. There were 17 rallies held across Australia against gendered violence. Again, interestingly, I didn't see these organised anywhere. I don't know when they were organised, but it seems like a bunch of, survivors groups. The What Were You Wearing, I think, was the main group that was organising rallies and
March for Justice people as well as just sort
March
of
for
hangovers.
Justice, yeah. So like
right.
Brittany Higgins folks, Grace. It was that kind of like Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame,
right?
Those folks who organised the March for Justice back in what was that 2021?
2021, yes. Well, I don't know. I guess Brittany Higgins did obviously speak outside Parliament House, but that was also, that was sort of a swelling of support for her plight and coming out. And so I think you had groups like Destroy the Joint maybe and others who were sort of, pushing that particularly and were organising there, yeah.
And of course, so there's rallies.
It's so bleak how many fucking groups there are and how many organisations have been set up. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, that's a society that's pretty broken when you've got, like, huge numbers of various bodies and responses to this ongoing, continued, horrific issue in society, for God's sakes.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of rallies across the country, but the one that has garnered the most attention, of course, because the Prime Minister was there and because of the interactions that he had with an organiser there, Sarah Williams, was this rally in Canberra. And there has been a lot of discourse on this. Tom, go ahead and explain what happened.
I don't know. I wasn't there, was I? I don't know. This is the best sort of summary that I think that I found in reading around a little bit. The Prime Minister on Monday found his messaging on violence against women overshadowed by allegations that he lied at Sunday's rally. After some confusion about whether he would speak at the Canberra rally, Albanese told the crowd, "We did ask to speak, myself and Katie Gallagher, and were told that wasn't possible, and that's fine. I respect the organisers' right to do that." Rally organiser Sarah Williams from the group What Were You Wearing immediately accused him of a lie and repeated this on social media later when she posted, "The Prime Minister of Australia lied to his country today." Just a side note, the Prime Minister lies to the country every day, and all politicians do, but I take the point.
Yeah.
She said she and the What Were You Wearing group had never denied him from speaking. He'd never asked to speak. His office made it clear he was just walking and was not interested in speaking. For him to not only demand he speak because he was being heckled, but lie was disgraceful, she said in this post. Albanese said on Monday that he'd been happy to not speak or to speak. Williams also said in a post that when she asked the crowd if we should let him speak, Albanese aggressively stated, "I'm the Prime Minister of the country. I run this country." Later in TV's interviews, he's like, "Hey, you've got the footage. People can make up their own mind. Let's not let this distract from the serious issue." So my understanding is that Sarah Williams was like, we didn't want to book him or not book him. I wanted to put it to the audience as to whether they wanted to hear Albanese in that particular moment. His response apparently is that, I'm the Prime Minister, which certainly comes across as somewhat tone deaf. I think I've covered everything there as best as I can. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's fucking messy is the answer. And it was confusing. And first there's this clip circulating of Albanese, appearing to get shitty basically at this First Nations domestic violence survivor and advocate. She starts crying as he's up there eventually after he gets the mic and starts speaking. She's obviously distressed. And so it was almost like a Scott Morrison, trying to grab the hand of bushfire survivors, that classic kind of footage. Yeah. Felt like a bit of that moment. I think that my interpretation is, this organizer of this rally, they had particular demands, and in particular, they wanted, for example, Albanese to declare family violence to be legally a national emergency.
Right.
And she didn't want him to speak if he wasn't going to actually commit to the demands. She didn't want him to just get up and spruik what the government was already doing, which is what these politicians usually do. And that's obviously where I think the confusion has come from. And, he didn't want to or couldn't commit to those things. And so he was like, well, I do want to speak, though, because I'm the Prime Minister. But, it's incredibly depressing that this has, so drastically dominated at least my Twitter feed. This week. And even, there's a lot of media discourse about it. I will say, actually, I did find, we can put the link in the show notes, I found Annabel Crabb's analysis. I haven't, read the whole thing in depth in terms of her take on the issue itself, but it did help to lay out what might have happened at that rally.
Right, okay.
But this then led to, Sarah Williams getting this massive pile on, being really publicly vilified for then having lied. And it all feels a bit like a response, right? A distraction to what the actual
What do people think
is.
She lied about? Sorry, the idea that he wasn't.
People think she lied about not having refused him the opportunity to speak.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, can I just, like, from his point of view, bad call to speak. Don't speak. Go there.
And yes,
okay,
like,
I'm putting on my purely cynical political lens here, right? I think the image of you going and being a punter amongst other people in the crowd, listening to people speak about family violence, again, in a very cynical move, like that's a better representation of you listening to this issue than you trying to stand up and defend. Like, I don't know what he thought would happen in terms of his speech and whether he would win people over or what have you. People knew that he was there. That's the main thing. And it was a bit bizarre when he's up there talking, saying all governments need to do better, even my own. It's the classic Joe Biden tweet. It's like, who the hell is the president? It's like, it's you, dude.
After just saying, I'm the prime minister, I run this country. And yeah, there are reports of him like standing in the crowd as people are speaking, going like, oh, we're already doing that. That's not true. Kind of talking back and like getting increasingly.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, well, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's been verified, but that's what I've seen circulating. And I wouldn't be surprised. Like, that's how Labor people get, right? And they're like, no, we're already doing this. Like, they get very defensive. And I think there was a real irony in this moment where we're talking about men's violence stemming from like uncontrollable anger to see the Prime Minister get so pissed off and defensive that he takes it out on a woman. You know what I mean? Like, and causes her at least emotional harm.
Yes.
So that definitely, there was a deep irony in that. And I can see why it got so much attention. But yeah.
Sorry. Well, the other thing I'd say is that I would argue that it's a bit laboured for some people to draw a parallel to, and I think maybe the coalition were trying to do this, to Scott Morrison's comments about the March for Justice rallies. I think there's a very big difference between staying in Parliament and talking about how, hey, it's good how these women aren't being shot, and acting like a bit of a douche at the actual rally that you're attending. I think these are two different things.
They're different,
and the idea that they are equally illustrative of those, those are equivalent in terms of the attitude towards women's rights and the seriousness with which you take this issue, I think is taking the piss a little bit. That's what I'd say.
But I thought it was interesting that, like this conflict point did largely seem to be, at least one of them, seemed to be around the demand that he declare a national emergency. And to be honest, I kind of agreed with his response on that it's like, declaring a national emergency kind of implies that this is a suddenly emerging and temporary state of affairs, like not an ongoing issue to be addressed. And that's where I thought it might just be worth looking at the numbers, because I feel like there's, from what I've been seeing, for example, on my Instagram feed, is a lot of sharing of like figures of numbers of women who have died to, as I understood it, domestic and family violence, like intimate partner violence this year. And I'd seen figures in the 30s circulating. I don't know where that figure comes from. What I have seen is Destroy the Joint runs this Counting Dead Women register, and they count every woman dead due to violence in Australia. In this year so far, the count's at 28 as of 30 April. But to be like, that's been reported as the figure for women dead to gendered violence this year. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true, because from what I can see looking at that list, it includes, for example, women killed by a couple, or like not just women killed by men. It also, most commonly even, or like quite a few of them, it appear to be women killed by men who weren't known to them. And that's not like, obviously that's not acceptable, and that is still gendered violence. You look at, for example, it includes the Bondi Junction stabbings and another stabbing in Ipswich that potentially, like we know at least in Bondi, was motivated by misogyny and by particular feelings towards women. So yes, that is gendered violence, but I'm having trouble with this like conflation between intimate partner violence and gendered violence against women, if we want to focus on the numbers, because it's only too easy for people to be like, well, are we just counting this or are we just counting that? And if we're just counting homicides of women, we miss the point, because as we know, the majority of homicides are committed against men. Like, men are more commonly killed by homicide. Of course, you can then say, well, yes, they're usually killed by men. But then it's like, well, but are we talking about attitudes towards women, or are we talking about attitudes of men? Do you know what I mean? Like it feels like it's getting complicated and messy because of this insistence on the numbers.
Right.
And maybe just quickly, I think you were referring to this Guardian article that was published this week around the increase in intimate partner violence in particular. So The Guardian published this story with the headline, "Almost 30% spike in rate of Australian women killed by intimate partner last year, data shows." What this actually is showing is in the 2022 to 23 financial year, 34 women were killed by a current or previous intimate partner, which is an increase of 8 on the previous financial year. So it's very small numbers, so it's easy to get a high percentage increase. That is not to say that 8 women dying is not fucking significant, but that's where you get the 30%.
Right.
It's worth noting, though, that is still the third lowest rate in the more than 30 years since the records began. So the rate has been steadily trending down. In fact, it's decreased by 66% since 30 years ago.
Right.
But it's had a bump, and some people say that there was actually, interestingly, like a suppression during COVID, which is kind of surprising because I would almost suspect it might increase during COVID and lockdowns, but they're saying it might just be kind of a bump back up post-COVID.
Right.
But, it's worth noting, of course, numbers.
But back to normal, everyone. We've snapped. We've snapped
just back to normal. But yeah, like it's not necessarily this growing trend. But if things did continue to go back the other way, obviously then we'd be like, well, what is going on here? And as well, like this is not I think maybe what is obscured here is the problem is a constant, which is that women are consistently over time, even as overall homicides fall, consistently about twice as likely as men to be victims of intimate partner homicide.
Right. I mean, the other stat that comes to mind, and I generally don't know the answer to this, was always like, a woman a week, right? Like it was always a woman a week is killed every week in Australia. I guess the assumption was, or perhaps this is where the real stat comes from, was the idea was that it was a domestic violence situation or was intimate partner violence. That was the understanding that we had, I think. You've heard that stat floated before,
I
right?
have, and yet, but then looking at this, I don't know where that comes from. And this kind of makes me, this is why looking at this, I started to get confused because I'm thinking I sort of take a lot of those stats for granted. And then I look at them and I'm like, oh, was that just counting every woman that died by violence? And that's significant, sure, but how can we, if we're trying to like tell the story, maybe we need to do that accurately. And I think again, it comes back to like this obsessive, there is this focus on numbers, I think, because we want to, it's almost like we focus on the numbers of the women to not just treat them like numbers, like to draw out and be like, this is 30 women, for example. They're real women with real lives. They had people who loved them and they're dead because someone fucking killed them. And like, we don't want to forget that. And we want to drum in the fact that is a significant problem. But it's like, is it just this problem of women being killed by their partners? Is it a problem of women being killed by men? Or is it a problem of men killing? And it seems more to be the latter to me.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, there was the editorial from the Saturday paper, which is the misogyny killings, where they basically run through every case this year so far, which including the names and the cases and what happened there. And they, which is, and reading that is quite shocking and powerful, certainly.
Yes.
I mean, yes, these are all murders and these are all women. I mean, yes, I suppose not every case here. We don't know yet, at least, whether these women were being killed because they are women or whatever.
No.
That's not necessarily the case, but yes.
Like, I guess what I'm
but
getting,
I don't know, is there something inherent about if a man kills a woman
is it inherently
for almost any reason, is that there's got to be a gender element to that murder or that killing, right? By the broad generalization that men have physical strength over women, generally speaking.
Yes, and it's like, but is that a logical calculation of the fact that I can physically overpower this person, or is it kind of an ideological assumption that I have the right to overpower this person? Like, and maybe there's a fine line between those. And I think the reason that I'm like, is it more about the problem being men killing? Like, yes, the problem is men killing women because we know that it's more common for women to be killed by men than men in terms of intimate partner violence in particular. Yeah. But it's like, what can we do about, like, is the missing link for me something that I think we don't talk about enough and that I've thought for many years is like, that kind of going back to the idea of toxic masculinity. Like, what is it in a man that makes him unable to deal with his emotions or whatever in a way other than expressing it through violence because of his conception of who he is and should be as a man under a patriarchal system. Like, I think that a woman is less likely to think that it's part of her identity, something that would be natural for her to do, to express herself through violence. And that's probably why women kill less frequently. And whether it's, we're including in these statistics, for example, the stabbing of a grandmother in a shopping centre. This is horrific, but like, to my mind, this looked as though, I think he was trying to steal a car and he'd asked her to give him the keys, and it doesn't particularly appear to be like misogyny related, but the expression of and the use of violence being presented as something that is natural, a natural inherent characteristic of being a man and of masculinity is a problem to my mind.
Yes, I agree.
Agree?
I'm against that. That's bad, yeah. But it's so interesting, right? Yeah. When you talk about the story of these statistics and what we're telling ourselves, I mean, that drop, as you say, like if you look at the 30-year trend of violence moving down, that also raises lots of questions about, which is what everyone's talking about, which is why is this happening? Like, why would there be an uptick? What are the drivers? What are the real factors that lead to this? Because if there has been a 66% decrease in the past 30 years, then the idea that it's pornography, it's culture, like all those is really sort of brought into question. And perhaps what has been missing, it seems to me, of the conversation is about like material and economic conditions and the reasons why things might be getting worse at the moment, also relating to people's economic circumstances or insecurity. I don't know. That really complicates the whole story, doesn't it?
Well, let's talk about solutions, because this is then where we turn to. And you and I were talking about, I think the trouble for me, at least for the first part of this week, was seeing this moment happening and going, I just don't feel like I am connecting to this because I can't connect to a particular like political solution that actually makes sense to me. And we ended up this week, Albanese at those rallies, he announces that he's going to call a national cabinet meeting, and they meet on Wednesday. He comes out and he says, we're investing $925 million to extend this former coalition government program, the Escaping Violence payment. And so people can get $5,000, or women can get $5,000 one-off payments, $1,500 in cash, $3,500 comes on this prepaid card for goods and services. And they're expanding this scheme, which is like, that's fine, I guess, as a safety net thing. Unfortunately, it then comes out apparently fewer than half of those who'd applied for the payment previously have received it. So it looks as though just extending this scheme kind of as it is, as the coalition have designed it, is probably not going to solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
So, like we know that that's not enough, and we know that frontline services in particular are still crying out for funding. It seems like at this National Cabinet meeting, there was no major commitment secured from state or territory governments, no funding for frontline support services. Their agenda says that women's legal services, for example, have to turn away 52,000 women every year because they're not funded to meet demands. And yet DV services are like crying out for funding. But then there's these related problems. So there's calls for funding for services. There's also calls for funding for housing in particular. And I think one of the problems that's happening here is governments say, well, we're addressing the housing need for domestic and family violence because we're creating more specialist, domestic DFV or crisis accommodation. But you look at the stats, and the real problem is women, if they're lucky enough to get into crisis accommodation, there are a few numbers there, but then it drops as it gets to like medium-term accommodation. Very few of them get that. When it gets to long-term accommodation, it's a fraction of the women who need it, because the government doesn't want to invest in actual long-term social and affordable housing, as we have fucking discussed. We know that that's a problem. There's also Jess Hill, for example, who wrote that book, See What You Made Me Do, great book on domestic and family violence. She suggested more support to address problem gambling, which is linked to domestic and family violence. Other groups are saying it's really disappointing that there's no plan to address alcohol misuse, alcohol addiction, and other drugs, and as that relates to domestic and family violence. And I looked at all of these solutions and I'm like, oh, this is where I find, like, I actually feel a little bit of a spark there. Like, I'm like, yes, housing, you know, support for problem gambling, support for alcohol and other drugs, those solutions make sense to me. And what do they all have in common? The government is not going to fucking do them because they actually require them to take on corporate interests. Like, they don't want to take on the gambling lobby. They don't want to take on the alcohol lobby. And they will not build enough public and social housing because they know that it threatens the investment interests of the property lobby. And so we're not hearing about those things. And those are the things I want to hear about because I'm a socialist.
Well, also, I mean, yeah, funding, you know, fucking services seems like a real gimme. But of course, you know, I mean, yes, you've got $925 million for this scheme that doesn't seem to be working very well, which, I don't know, I'm sure for some women it's been helpful to give them the support they need. But you don't, you can't look at the actual funding levels. I mean, remember Tony Abbott cut $300 million or something out of frontline services back in 2014. And I'm pretty sure that hasn't really been fully restored, of course, ever since. I mean, people are also pointing out the fact that when you have a job seeker payment that keeps people in poverty, when you have the partner income test as well, you're setting up systems which fundamentally tie people potentially to their abusers and to their potential killers as well. I mean, again, the same stuff that people have been banging on about forever. You know, poverty breeds more issues, and the government is choosing to maintain that status quo and not do anything about it, for fuck's sake.
Yes, they won't touch that, but they will touch, you know, the thing you were kind of alluding to. There seems to be this like broad agreement, right? That it's like the government needs to fund services and do stuff. And also there needs to be maybe a cultural change, and maybe we're all getting fucked up because we're all sitting on our phones so much and the kids are watching too much violent porn or something, or they're watching too much Andrew Tate. Like whatever's going on there, something might be bad online because, yes, if we look at it and we go, maybe there's an uptick, then we think how does that track with what's been happening in the last few years, which is increased use of our phones. So the government, like Albanese, as part of this package that came out of National Cabinet, also announced new legislation to ban deepfake pornography, a $6.5 million trial of online age verification systems, which we discussed at our live show last week, and we may put out a little bonus Patreon about that, about social media regulation.
Is that for social media or for porn?
Well, that's for porn. So actually, I guess that's a different thing, isn't it?
Right.
But it has similar problems, right? They're like, is that really going to work? If people really want to find stuff, they'll find a way.
I mean, again, I was listening to Jess Hill being interviewed about this, and she's sort of saying the same idea. When you blame things on culture, and I mean, Albanese was saying it's up to every man to address this, and we've all got to work together. I mean, it does get to a point where you sort of like, very, very few specific people are being held accountable, or there's very specific actions to be done when it becomes very amorphous in this kind of big cultural
it's hard,
thing.
Right? Because like I agree. Yes, I'm like, that's an easy get out of jail free card for the government, particularly if they're not going to do anything on those systemic changes that are going to challenge, you know, corporate profits. But it's true that it does probably make a difference if in every social situation, around the dinner table, at the pub, wherever it is, someone says something misogynistic, and someone, like, the way that men in particular around that react makes a difference to how socially acceptable it is, and to how that's enabled to flourish and grow into something potentially more violent. Like, it's true that there is something to be done there, and I'm like, I get, you know, all the people posting about holding your friends accountable and speaking up and all of that. Like, it kind of does. I know, like, for me, when I have had men who have been willing to be like, that's a fucking weird thing to say, when like men have said fucking weird shit about me, that made a difference to me. But it's like, yes, it's certainly not
yes,
enough.
I agree with you. It's just like when we're talking about government action.
No, yes.
I mean, like, does a government ad? I don't know. I always see those government ads, and I'm just like, this is.
Oh yeah,
nothing.
well,
this is advertising for the government, isn't it?
I know they're saying that they're also doing a new online ad campaign to challenge misogynistic stereotypes perpetuated on the internet. I'm intrigued to know what that looks like, because it kind of they're saying they're going to do it where these stereotypes are perpetuated. So it's pretty much like, if you go to watch an Andrew Tate video, something's going to pop up and be like, that's not cool. And just based on how government ads have been in the past.
Hey guys, women are actually good. Skip ad.
But then again, there have been some have worked, right? Like, I mean, I always think about the coward punch campaign, that it's like we kind of did seem to change the idea that like it's okay and cool to fucking knock someone out in public in a vast, you know, majority of society. So maybe they can be successful, but a lot of them flop. So we'll see what they come out with.
And you don't want to, I mean, you know, people trying to do something is fine. I guess, yeah, the political move in which these examples, these much more amorphous, vague examples are pointed to as examples of action. And yes, we're taking this seriously as a distraction from the stuff that we mentioned, where we really want them to pay attention to, which would make a serious difference. It would be harder because you'd have to take on those special interests, but it would actually make a more material difference in people's lives.
Well, and there is another area that the government can be shown to be taking swift action without challenging corporate interests. And of course, that is always more laws, more cops, more prisons, lock them up. And it's funny that it took me a little while to clock onto this week. I was sort of like, what's going on with this moment? What does it all mean? What do I think about it? And then only in the last couple of days, I've been like, oh, this is where it's heading. We've had, 11 crossbenchers, all the little independents wrote to the government calling for a plan. Some good things, but they have all called for things for things including mandatory sentencing, bail reforms, so, refusing bail, for example, after one offence, stronger consequences for breaching AVOs, electronic monitoring, that is more ankle GPS trackers effectively, abolishing the omission of good character references. I kind of agree with that. A national domestic violence register. It's a very carceral feminism approach. There's this quote in an article that said the crossbenchers said gender-based violence must be treated with, quote, the same level of urgency we show acts of terrorism, as women and children are being terrorized across our nation. And I go back again to what I said when we were talking about the stabbings, and it's like approaching things with the urgency with which we approach terrorism is not good. Our government is fucking bad, and like the carceral state is inflicting real damage on the population broadly, the poor population broadly, the First Nations and people of colour in this country. And it doesn't actually improve community safety. All of the experts, all of the advocates who know what they're talking about are not calling for a more carceral approach. But I think you can bet your bottom dollar that is what we're going to get from governments, particularly, state governments where this lies. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them come out from here and say that we are going to make harsher laws and we're going to lock more people up. Already, New South Wales has lodged an inquiry into bail after a man who was charged with crimes against a woman, was granted bail. He then went out and allegedly killed her. And that is horrific. But the idea that by tightening bail, you can prevent that from happening, it's just not true, because it's the same conversation that we have, particularly in Queensland, around youth crime, where they're like, it's about bail. They shouldn't be out on bail. Someone was out on bail. They committed a crime. They shouldn't have been out on bail. And it's like, okay, but what does that actually look like? Because are you saying that they shouldn't get bail for any offence, because you never know, maybe they'll do something worse in the future. They steal a candy bar, lock them up, no bail. And then you put them in prison, because then we need to have harsher sentences. We need mandatory sentencing. The courts shouldn't have any discretion. Put them in prison for what? For life? You're going to keep them there for their entire life? Because that's what you really need to do if you're saying that the only way to keep the community safe is to put them in jail. You need to lock them up for the rest of their life. Now, not only is that fucking impossible realistically, but also it's hugely expensive and it's just ridiculous. It's not going to work. So this idea of reforming bail, it is really frustrating to me. There was that clip of this ex-cop. I didn't realize he was an ex-cop until I went and actually watched the full clip on Q&A. Did you see this? The guy who was like, how dare you play politics with women's violence going viral? Yes,
I saw clips of people, being like, give it to him, serve the political class.
Everyone loved it. Everyone loved this guy.
The very first question you asked the two parliamentarians, they immediately started bickering amongst each other about who had the best politics. That just goes to show the point that you are overlooking the murder of women out here. You're putting politics above these people behind me.
And interestingly, his name was Vincent Hurley. He was on Q&A. He went on this spiel about how he'd seen domestic violence up close, and, it was horrific that the politicians were just bickering amongst themselves and politicising this issue and not doing what needed to be done. And he said some good things, like he was, criticising them for not funding frontline services when they can afford to pour all of these billions of dollars into defence, for example. But then he was like,
There will be people who vehemently disagree about the rule of law, about the right of individuals, about the innocence before guilty, but what does society want?
Well, people aren't going to like this because it goes against the rule of law and fundamental, human rights and rights to justice, etc. But they should not get bail. He is saying, if they've got any offence, they should not get bail. You should remove the presumption against bail because that's what society wants. And it's like, yeah, that's what society wants because they are not being offered any viable alternative because you won't address the root causes. You won't provide adequate housing. You won't fund the frontline services. You won't address alcohol abuse. You won't address problem gambling. You won't raise social security, any of that. So, yeah, no surprise. That's what society wants because that's all they're ever offered.
Yeah. When people say we should treat this like terrorism, do they think that the war on terror was good? Do they think that went well? Do they have any critique at all about the response to the hysteria-informed, insane, racist response to the terrorist attacks that we had in this country? Or are they that was awesome, let's do that when it comes to domestic violence too? Yeah,
I don't know. These are meant to be the progressive teals, so who fucking knows what they're thinking?
Well, but, to their credit, as you mentioned, getting good character reference, dumping that might be a good reform. I think, again, listening to Jess Hill, the AVO tightening was a little bit like a woman goes to a court, gets an AVO granted, the person that she got the AVO against breaches that AVO, and it seems that they're often dismissed as technical breaches, or at least that isn't taken seriously. That sounds like something where if a woman's gone to a court, been awarded an AVO, you would hope that would be, and then, that guy sends her flowers at work or makes it clear that he's still watching her or contacting her, breaches that AVO, you would like that to be it taken seriously. And the impression I got from Jess Hill is that the system doesn't currently do that, probably because people are like, paperwork, that's annoying.
Well, the question, of course, is what does it being taken seriously look like? And, is it going to be a response that actually addresses the issue, or is it just a purely, a cops and prisons response when And most women who have been through this will say that, even when you do get to go through the courts, that's not a positive experience. It doesn't really fix the problem. And that's why, for example, I know Sarah Williams and the organisers of these rallies were calling for the ability to report offending to alternatives to police effectively because dealing with police fucking sucks. So
yes, particularly for First Nations people, I think that point has been made, for Aboriginal women, it's a nightmare. And again, this is from the Schwartz Media Post Roundup. Freedom of Information requests reveal that 37 New South Wales police officers were charged with domestic violence in 2022 and 2023. Yeah. That's just in New South Wales over the course of a year. That's fucking insane. So you can completely understand why women are very hesitant to approach this same police force to help them with this issue.
I don't know if you thought, the inquiry in Queensland into the Queensland Police Service responses to domestic and family violence just recently, the stories that they told there, including, for example, police leaking personal information of a domestic violence survivor to her perpetrator.
Jesus Christ.
It's, no wonder people don't want to go to the police. Look, it will be interesting to see whether the states and territories do come up with more funding commitments, but I really doubt that we are going to see much systemic responses that actually address the economic and material conditions that might be driving these problems. Do we need a Royal Commission? That's a big question on everyone's lips, Tom. My answer, no.
Well, again, a full credit to the Albanese government saying no. They're obviously saying no for their own reasons, but they were like, no, we have lots of inquiries and solutions, so we're not going to do that. I think everyone knows my thoughts on Royal Commissions and inquiries. Look, my other thing, look at this, is politically, where is the pressure really going to come from in an electoral sense? That is, are people going to change their vote on this particular issue? They're certainly not going to switch from Labor to the Coalition on the issue of women's rights and protecting women. That's just not going to happen. And maybe you might see, I don't know, some Labor voters go teal or maybe come to the Greens. Larissa Waters was sort of saying that this funding commitment is woefully inadequate and not enough. And we have a full, women's safety and women's rights and anti-gendered violence policy platform. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just wasn't sure. I felt like there's a lot of anger there, but whether that's actually going to result in any kind of electoral change, not that that's the be all and end all, but I'm just saying in terms of how seriously the Labor Party takes it will be interesting to see, I suppose.
It will be indeed.
call to action this week, we just want to send love and solidarity to anyone taking action for Palestine across this country and around the world, particularly students at the moment who are doing cool student stuff, doing what you would hope students would do, which is fucking do the right thing, speak up for justice, speak out against genocide, and for their trouble are copping a shitload of flack and cops bashing in their heads, and they're being demonized in the press. And I think on Australian campuses particularly, we've had Zionists and pro-Israel groups literally storming these camps, blasting them with music, letting off fireworks, I think, at some point, like just truly crazy shit. But there are camps set up at Monash Uni, the universities of Melbourne, Sydney and Queensland, ANU in Canberra, Curtin University in Perth. You're all heroes. Sorry if I'm missing anyone there. But yes, that's joining, obviously, the student movement in the US as well, people camping out there, many of them becoming insanely violent. If you can, first of all, if you're a student and you can join them or provide material support to these groups or find them on social media and send them your love and solidarity, that would be sick. They all kind of have different social accounts and stuff for their own respective actions, but there is a Students for Palestine Australia Facebook group, which you can join. I assume there's a process of checking who gets into that group for some understandable reasons. But yes, if you're interested in joining that group, if you're a student yourself and you want to help them out or lend them support, we'll put the link for that in the show notes if you so wish. Also, another action taking internationally is the Freedom Flotilla. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition's vessel, the Handala, set sail on May the 2nd, I believe, just this week, to several Northern European countries today. This is a flotilla of people trying to send aid, raise awareness, and trying to get through with support for Gaza. They departed from Norway to challenge and break the inhumane blockade of Gaza and to shed light on the consequences of the inhumane measures taken against Palestinian children by Israel, with the support of the US and other countries, despite the global outcry for a permanent ceasefire and the end of an occupied Palestine. There were flotillas years ago that were then sort of cut off with the blockade, people just trying to get supplies and, I don't know, love, solidarity, humanity to the people of Gaza at the moment. You can find out what they're up to. There's lots of different ways you can support the flotilla. Just go to freedomflotilla.org. We'll put a link in the show notes again for you to find out about that. There are Australians on this flotilla. There are people from all over the world who have come together to try and, both symbolically and also practically try and reach the people of Gaza and say that we are with you. So check that out, freedomflotilla.org.
Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, or if you're listening now, you can support us on Patreon for just $3 a month and become a member and get access to bonus content. You can follow us at Serious Danger AU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. All the links, everything you need are at seriousdangerpod.com. Tom is going to be away next week, but we will have a special co-host guest, and he shall return. He shall be back.
Oh, I'll be back.
He's away for my birthday week.
Oh, shit. Happy birthday, Emerald. Birthday week.
Thanks. If you'd like to email me birthday wishes or anything else, hello@seriousdangerpod.com. That's it.
Bye-bye.
Serious Danger Australia.